welcome back to BHookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and in this episode we're going to do something a little bit different. In this episode I'm going to demonstrate how to loom knit a simple hat, and a big thanks to our sponsor Boy for providing today's tools. We're going to be using the new Boy Loom Kit in order to make our hats. So to complete this project, you're going to need any of the sizes of round looms in your Boy Loom Kit, and a single ball of yarn that is a bulky weight. I'm going to be using Red Heart Boutique Infinity. And you'll also need a darning needle and your loom hook. To begin your loom knit hat, as I mentioned, you'll need any of the sizes of round loom that come in your Boy Loom Kit. I'm going to be using the adult size here. This is just the adult small. And what we want to do is locate the starting peg. And once we find that, we can create a slip knot with our yarn, and you'll want to leave yourself a tail that's about 5 or 6 inches. So just create that slip knot and place it on that starting peg, and then just pull tight. So loom knitting is super easy. One thing that you need to get comfortable with doing is wrapping the yarn around the pegs. So what we're going to do, we're not going to do anything with this first peg that's directly across from the starting peg. We're going to start on that next peg over. And so I've wrapped the yarn on the inside, and I'm just going to continue to wrap that around in a circle. And then I'm going to jump over to the next peg, place it around the back, and wrap it just like so. And then again with the next peg, wrap it around, and then just continue on all the way around the loom. Now you don't want to make these wraps too tight because we are going to need to move them in order to start loom knitting, but you want them tight enough so that they don't come off. And it's usually a good idea to hold on to that yarn as you're wrapping around, just so it doesn't pop off, because in that case it'll all come unraveled and you'll have to work it all over again. So when you've made it all the way around, you want to make sure that we do have a wrap on that first peg, the one that we skipped before. And just on this first couple of rounds, we're going to wrap twice. So what we need to do is we need to have 2 strands on each one of these pegs. That way we can flip one up and over to start the knitting process. So what I'm just doing right now is just sliding the yarn down the pegs. And you'll want to do that to make room for the new wrap that we're going to be doing. Okay, so I've just been holding this in place, and we're going to just jump right into wrapping the very next peg, and then just keep going. Okay, once you've made it all the way around and so you've wrapped your last peg, so again we want to make sure that each one of these pegs have 2 loops on them. And I'm holding on to the working yarn here with my fingers, and just to go ahead and set that stitch in place, we can pick up our loom needle and we're just gonna use the little guide here, so you can see the little crevice there for you to stick your loom into, and we just want to grab that bottom strand and flip it up and over that peg. Now at that point it's safe to drop our working yarn because we have knitted that stitch over, and we can move on to the next. But the coolest thing about the loom knit in this particular pattern, it's one of the easiest patterns that you can do, which makes it great for a beginner. This is the only motion that we're going to need to do for this pattern. We just want to grab that bottom loop and flip it up and over the peg. One of the things that I really love about this loom here by Boy is that it has a little, almost like a hook, like a crochet hook edge that catches that top loop. So as you're flipping that bottom strand up and over, even if you do wrap your strands a little bit too tight, see how that hook just kind of caught that top strand? So that way we're not completely knitting it off the peg there. So if we were to flip both of these loops over that peg, then we would drop that stitch, and it's not that easy to fix a mistake like that. You've got to go back over and try to wrap that peg once that happens. So this loom pretty much eliminates that from happening. Now once you have knitted off all of your loops, and so we've made it around, if you didn't do this as you go along, you want to go ahead and push those stitches down just so that they are kind of sitting towards the bottom of those pegs. Because what we're going to do now is start wrapping again. So I mentioned this pattern is super easy, so we're just going to be repeating the same wrapping technique that we used before, and then we're just going to start knitting off those loops. So again, I've got my working yarn coming from back here, and I'm just going to take it just directly onto that second peg there, and I'm just going to wrap around. So I'm just sort of pushing these stitches down as I go. So when you're wrapping these, you want to make sure you're going in a clockwise motion. Okay, and your last wrap or your last peg should be the one that's directly across from that starting peg. And again, you'll just hold the working yarn to the back there just so it doesn't come loose. And then you'll grab that bottom strand and just knit it over. And then you can drop that working yarn and it'll stay in place from there on out. And once again, we're just going to grab the bottom strand, pull it up and over the peg, and move on to the next. Okay, so with that, that finishes up the second round. And so if you take a look at the inside of your loom, it doesn't really look like much now, but it should look something like this. Okay, it's going to take several rounds for you to really be able to see a pattern and for it to come out the inside of the loom. So as you're working this part right here is going to be the outside of the hat. This is the inside of the hat. So as you knit it off, it's going to come down in through the center of the loom. So depending on which size loom you're using and how big of a hat you're making, whether you're making it a beanie that fits directly on the head or if you're making a slouchy style, that's going to determine how many rounds you use and how long you create it. Generally what I do when I loom knit, I don't really count the rounds as I go. I typically just work it up until it's as long as I need it. So for this is the adult size, the adult small, so this is going to fit most women's and teenagers. And so for this, I would work it up until it measures about 7 to 9 inches, depending on if you're wanting it to be a beanie or a slouchy. But we will have to keep a little extra length to finish it off because we are going to use a drawstring bind off at the very end. So this part down here is the bottom of the hat, and so we're working it from bottom to top, and so we're going to close it up by using the drawstring bind off. So what I need for you to do at this point, since this pattern is so easy and you've probably got the hang of it at this point, is just work up this hat until it measures the proper length. So for me, I'm going to work this up until it's about 9 inches long because I want it to be kind of slouchy and a little bit long. So go ahead and work it up until it's the length that you need. Pause this video and come back and we'll talk about how to do the drawstring bind off and how you're going to finish your hat. Once you work a few rounds, I just want to come back real quick to demonstrate once you get a few rounds where we put the slip knot on the holding peg or the starting peg there, you'll notice that it's going to get stuck here at the bottom. So as it gets longer, then this is going to continue to have tension on it. So the purpose of putting that slip knot on the starting peg was just to get things started. So once you get a few rounds, you can go ahead and remove the slip knot and then just pull on that to remove the knot. And then you can pull it through. And it's going to hold on, so it's not going to come unraveled or anything like that. So once you get that done, you'll see now I've got a little bit of work here going, and as the stitches come off the loom, you'll notice it's really quite stretched out, and that's normal. It's going to come together the longer it gets. So at this point, you'll just want to continue working and come back to this video when you're done with your hat. So off camera, I have worked enough rounds so that my hat measures about 11 inches right now. And I made it go that long because I want this to be sort of a slouchy style hat. So you can just kind of gauge it based on which size loom you're using and what type of hat you're making. You can just sort of gauge how long you want it. And you can do that by measuring the top of the head all the way down to the bottom of the ear and then kind of working from there. If you're duplicating what I'm doing here, you'll be using the orange round loom and working about 11 inches. So once you have it to that point, we're ready to bind off, and we want to use a drawstring bind off. So what we want to do is cut our tail, and we want to leave it about 1.5 feet or so. We want this to wrap around the loom. So cut yourself some slack, and then grab the darning needle that comes in your loom kit and thread that tail. And then what we want to do is take our darning needle and thread it from the bottom up of the very first peg. So this is the one that's directly across from that starting peg. And then just feed that through. And then once you have that strand in there, you can pull it off the peg. And then we can work the next one in the same way. And then pull it off the peg. And we're going to do that all the way around the loom. And once you've worked your last stitch off the loom, then we should be able to just grab that working strand there, or that tail, and just pull real tight on it. And that is going to close it up. Just like that. But we can't just leave it like this, because otherwise all we have to do is pull it and it'll stretch back out. So we just need to secure the end, and we're going to add a few whip stitches to the outside here, and then we'll flip it and add some on the inside. So I've got my tail coming from this bottom side here, so I'm just going to go through the top and come down. Sometimes it's a little difficult to pull the darning needle through those stitches, but just work it through and then do that again. We just want to make sure it's nice and secure. Okay, and then when I usually like to switch it up and go the other direction. Okay, then what we need to do is find the middle and stick your darning needle down through the middle, and then we want to pull it coming from the inside. So I'm going to turn this inside out so you can see what's going on here. Okay, and then I'm just going to add a couple of whip stitches just to make sure that it's extra secure. And when I pull that through, now this time I'm going to put the darning needle through it to kind of make a little knot there. I'm going to do that one more time. And then put the darning needle through. Okay, now it should be nice and secure. We can just go ahead and trim that tail. And the last thing we need to do is simply weave in the tail from the beginning. And I like to do that on the wrong side or the inside of the hat. That way the tail stays hidden. Okay, so then what we want to do is just run it through so that it's on the inside. And now we can just work this up and weave it into the stitches there. Just going to weave it up a couple and then turn it to the side and kind of work through just like that. Okay. And once you've got that woven in, you can trim off that tail. And now our hats are complete. So you could add a pom-pom to the top if you'd like, or you can just leave it just like this. This concludes our video tutorial on the simple loom knit hat. On behalf of BHookedCrochet.com and our sponsor, Boy, we hope to see you in the next video on BHookedCrochet.com.